Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, so we are here today mainly right now on this weekend speaking to my A and D classes, right? And then on Tuesday, this video is going to be going out to my F period classes, right? God, my hair is messed up. Now, anyway, but, okay, the big thing about this flip in particular is that it is the last of the Middle Ages stuff, and then we're going to be getting into the Renaissance next, and your test, of course, is scheduled for Thursday. Now, let's go ahead and get into a major event that kind of rocked everything going on at the time. It's known as the 100 Years' War, right? So, our big events that we're talking about in the late Middle Ages are the 100 Years' War and the Black Plague, right? Now, a lot of probably other history teachers out there right now, or anybody else that's watching this currently that's not in my class, is probably going to sit there and say, how can you talk about the late Middle Ages without talking about the corruption of the Catholic Church? All right, well, we're going to talk about that later, but we're going to actually talk about that when we get to the Reformation, kind of using it as fodder for the fire. All right, so the big late Middle Ages things that we're focusing on are, of course, the ongoing Crusades, the 100 Years' War, and then as well as the Black Plague, right? Now, anyway, let's go ahead and get after it, shall we? In this 100 Years' War, this entire big thing is between England and France. Well, England and Burgundy and France against France. Well, England and Scotland's in there too. Like, it's a lot of crazy stuff, all right? But what is really important is what it all started out as. It all came down to a throne, of course, and a crown, and who gets to be in charge, right? So this entire family tree right here shows this end of the French nobility and the French king, right? So you had Philip III, Philip III was the king of France from 1270 to 1285, right? One of his daughters ends up getting married off to a French noble named Charles of Valois. So you just need to know the Valois family a little bit, all right? You just need to know that they're there, and they are directly related to French nobility. But it didn't really matter that he got married off, considering the fact that Philip IV, his son, is going to end up taking over. Well, the thing that ends up happening is Philip IV has 3 boys and 1 girl, right? Out of those 3 boys, Louis X, Philip V, and Charles IV, all of them end up dead, right? So without any male heirs. However, the only person left associated with the crown is Isabella, who does not live in France anymore. She actually lives in England, right? So Edward II is the guy that she gets married to, and they produce Edward III, who technically is the closest living relative to the French royal crown. Edward III claims because of his land holdings in France that he should be allowed to be king of all of France, right? Well, the French disagree with that, and so breaks out the 100 Years' War, right? So the big major conflict of the 100 Years' War, which lasts from 1347 to 1453, is a very long, drawn-out conflict. Originally started between England and France and set up a lot of animosity between them for the years to come throughout most of European history, right? Philip VI of France is going to be crowned king of France, right? Edward III refuses to say that he is a subject of the French because of the lands that he holds there, and says, I am the rightful heir to this French throne, and decides to start a war, right? So you've got, best way to remember it, you've got Philip VI of France. Philip is from France. Also, write his last name down, which is very important. He is a Valois, all right? So Valois, Valois. And that family ends up running the French crown for hundreds of years, right? So then you've got Edward III of England, right? Edward III of England tries his best to try and take over the French throne because they own a nice little chunk of southern France called Aquitaine, right? So the big thing about it is these two end up going to war based off who gets to get the throne, right? And the reason why Edward is not allowed, according to French law, to inherit the throne is because he would be inheriting it through his mother, right? Jot this down really quick. This old law on the books in French culture was called Salic law, S-A-L-I-C, that said you cannot inherit royal positions through women, all right? So the big conflict's going to break out when Philip VI takes the throne after the death of his cousin Charles, right? Charles the Fourth, I think. Charles the Fourth? Fourth? Fifth? No? Charles. Yeah, Charles IV. All right, so anyway, now, Philip VI takes the throne, right? Now, he's technically not directly related. He's related by marriage and somewhat by blood. But Edward felt that he should control France since he owns land there, right? And he's related to Charles, right, by blood. He is his nephew, all right? So here's the big map of France that's going to be going on in this entire shebang bang. Now, but the thing about it is when bring it on back. Now, anyway, when Philip says, no, you must swear your allegiance to me, Edward freaks out, and the 100 Years' War begins, right? So here's the little chunk of France that Edward actually owns, right? It's remnants of royal holdings from different marriages throughout time, right? So a lot of times what would happen in Europe during the Middle Ages is they would marry daughters off to other kings, as basically known as marriages of convenience, right? And they would use them as treaties, right? Well, you will get my daughter and you will be directly related to the French crown and we'll give you some land in southern France, right? So England owned this region down here called Aquitaine. And because Edward felt that he deserved to be king of France because of that land, Philip said, shut up, and confiscated the land completely, leading to the 100 Years' War, right? So this, as you can see, everything gets very, very crazy. Green is your English holdings. Orange is your French holdings, right? Well, it's England and its allies, okay? So as you can see, from this phase to this phase to this phase, England was kicking France's butt for most of this war, right? So go ahead and jot that down. England was winning for 75% of this war, right? England was smoking them. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that the alliances inside of this 100 Years' War are very, 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 very messy. All right, so now, and I'm going to explain that here in like 2 seconds. But these are the important lasting details of this war that you need to remember. First and foremost, that it lasted longer than that. It actually lasted for 116 years, right? And also, let's not even kid ourselves. This was not a straight fallout war of 116 years straight. There was tons of different peace, right? A lot of peace, tons of different truces, things like that. There were really only 9 huge battles and a lot of really long truces. Because, like, you have to have a lot of money to fight a war. And a lot of times the English crown and the French crown were running out of funds whenever they wanted to start a battle, and then so they had to take periods of peace to raise funds to keep the battle going. Also, here's the other thing, too. For number 2, jot this down as well. A lot of these leaders are going to die a lot. All right, so Philip VI and Edward III started this entire campaign against each other. Both of them end up dead within the first 30 years of the war, right? So then their inheritance actually tried to take it over, and then those people end up dead from like illnesses and crazy stuff like that. For example, Edward III's son, Edward the Black Prince, is considered, because the black armor that he wore, is considered one of the major heroes up front in this war. And then one of their descendants later on, actually he's not even one of their descendants, it's some other family that took over at some point, ends up taking over, is Henry V, and he becomes the king of France and England. But a lot of French are like, no, and don't recognize him, and all this other crazy stuff, right? So a lot of these leaders end up dying throughout this war. Then also some major weapons are going to be making their debuts in this war, right? We end up seeing the debut of the English longbow, right? So this bad boy right here is the reason why the Englishmen were able to actually win so many wars. Edward the Black Prince, the guy that I was just talking about, he actually commissioned his armies to be over 70% archers because longbowmen from Wales and other areas of England could just rain down seas of arrows on top of unsuspecting French troops, because this is what the French had. They had crossbows, right? So some of y'all are like, wait a minute, Mr. Terry, crossbows seem way more advanced than this dinky little bow and arrow. You're not wrong, but here's the irony, all right? Crossbows can't go as far. They take longer to reload. They're clunky and heavy, and then not to mention the fact as well is that if you lose this piece to reload your crossbow with, it is now nothing more than a glorified paperweight with some pointy little arrows that go with it, right? So a longbow can travel 3 times the distance with just as much accuracy as a crossbow, right? So this weapon would end up superseding. At the Battle of Agincourt, actually, the French thought they were going to win because they outnumbered the English almost 3-1, and they stormed through a field to try and take the advantage of the archers away, because how do you beat an archer? By fighting him in his face, right? So the big thing about it is those archers start lighting the French up because at the Battle of Agincourt, the French got stuck in the mud. Men were drowning in the mud, right? And they were just getting lit up by English longbowmen left and right. So the longbow is a huge one. But then also, the French end up winning because of these weapons that they had actually debuted after having communications and trade negotiations with the Chinese, right? These are gunpowder weapons, okay? You saw the very first use of cannons in this weapon, the very first use of breech-loading guns in this weapon, right? This is what the guns looked like, which are ugly, terrible, and god-awful, and clunky, and hard to reload, and not accurate, and everything else. But the cannons are a big deal, right? Used as a siege weapon, right? So now, anyway, and like I said, the big other enduring understandings is England was crushing France for most of this war until Scotland gets involved and helps kind of pincer move them a little bit. Not to mention the fact when a very special lady shows up that ends up turning the tide for France, right? And also, like I said right here, number 5, the alliances were very, very messy. Let me go ahead and go forward real quick. Yep. Wait. Yep. All right, cool. The alliances are crazy messy. All right. So, and when I say that, it's because war was fought on and off from 1337 all the way up until 1453. But France is going to end up winning after they get kind of really, really screwed over. So where it says the alliances are very messy, jot this down. Okay. Parts of France allied with England, okay? They were called the Burgundians, or Burgundy, right? So that's because this is like, it relates to this whole topic right here. France is going to win because they end up allying with Scotland, and the Burgundians end up realizing that the French are going to win after this one woman actually helps them win in the long run. But these Burgundian French people lived right next to England. And they had a very, very, very lucrative business association with the English because they had a lot of sheep farms and they had a lot of big textile mills and industries, right? And the British happened to be the biggest traders of all these things. They would actually ship on British vessels. So the Burgundians are not about to stab the English in the back when that's who they make all their money off of, right? So the Burgundians also end up taking, like, they capture the French crown, and, like, there's this whole thing with the Mad King and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But you need to know that, like, civil wars were even breaking out in France. So it was really France v. parts of France and England, right? So these alliances are crazy messy, okay? So listen to that again. They're very messy because parts of France were allying with England against their own people, all right? So that's why they were so messy, because it says that on your study guide, all right? So the French, though, are also going to be inspired, though, in the long run after they originally end up winning because they allied with this woman, right? No. Joan of Arc, right? Oh, the poor, illiterate peasant girl, literally, she actually, the only thing she could do by the time of her death was sign her own name, and it was bad at that. It was just like a little scribble. So this woman turns the tide for France, right? So she has a paper trail and a history longer than most people involved in this war, right? The man that she has crowned has less books written about him than the woman that turned the tide for the French after she broke church law, dressed like a man, and claimed that she heard the voices of angels, saints, and God himself, right? So now, you can't hear God himself. You'll end up exploding. But, like, you know. All right, so anyway, but this woman was born to a poor peasant family in a very small, like, village in France, right? She began to hear voices of God and saints around the age of 13 when she was working in her father's garden, right? And she says that she heard the voices in the directions of the church, and they would emit a huge light, and that's how she ended up actually seeing them at first. And then, according to these saints, she was supposed to be a pious person, uphold her chastity, and she would be given a mission from God later in life, right? So, for example, she avoids an arranged marriage by her father at the age of 16. Look at you, girl, right? So because she can't be married because she must remain chaste, right? So she then hears, around the age of, I think it's 18, 17, a voice from God that says, you have two missions, my young woman, my young maiden of France. I need you to do two things. One, you need to reinstall the French royal Valois family as the leaders of France, because there's this guy currently on the run from the English and the Burgundians, and his name's Charles the Seventh. Yeah, Charles the Seventh, the son of the Mad King, right? So she was like, he has been disinherited. He's not allowed to be the king right now. This is God telling her this. He's like, your job is to save the city of Orleans as proof, or Orleans, as like many people are going to pronounce it, because that's where New Orleans is named after, is the Orleans like city of France, who was actually being controlled by the British at the time. And you're going to go save that city to prove to Charles that he is the rightful king, and then you're going to take him to Reims and have him crowned king of all of the French, right? So she hears this mission. She's like, all right, I got to go. And so she leaves, right? She leaves her family, and she leaves them all behind, and she goes to a nearby town, and she dresses like a man, cuts her hair, and walks 11 days, right? And she goes to the commissioner of the garrison, and she's like, I need a horse, and I need some stuff, and I need to go meet with the prince, all right? Prince Charles. And he's like, no. And then so she leaves and then comes back with an army of peasants that she's convinced that she has convinced that she has heard God, right? And then he's like, all right, fine. And they give her a horse, and then she goes and travels to meet Charles. And Charles takes a very huge leap of faith after being convinced by like Joan of Arc, because when she shows up, there are tons of stories of how she proved that she had heard the voices of God to the crown prince. Some of them include that she walked into the meeting hall and there was an imposter on the throne, and she was like, that is not my king, that is my king. And she pointed to the actual Prince Charles, who was dressed like a commoner in the pews, right? There are other ones where it's, for example, like he had actually heard a lot of prophecies from a lot of other people, but whenever they were put to the tests by the church, they all failed, whereas she is the only one that actually passed. And then also in the long run, a lot of people, historians say, well, why wouldn't Charles believe her? He was going to be sending an army to Orleans anyway, so why don't I just let this girl lead and see what happens, right? So now, Joan of Arc is going to be granted an army by Charles, and her big mission is to go liberate the city of Orleans, right? So Joan has a huge victory in Orleans after she takes over the English garrison and beats them up real bad, and she destroys this Anglo-English army. Also the Burgundians, remember the Burgundians? Don't forget the Burgundians. She takes this city after she has been convinced that it's her method that's going to win, and as she rode in there, she wore white armor like an absolute gangster, all right? So, because it actually wasn't white, it was plate armor that had been polished to such a high shine that it appeared white, right? But she wins at the Battle of Orleans when everyone thought she was going to lose. And after that, she leads Charles to the city of Reims and has him crowned the new king of France, right? And all the English are like, she's got to be a witch. This is ridiculous. All right, so, but then she gets sent out again at one point to liberate a smaller city. And unfortunately, at this smaller city, which this is a crazy story that goes along with it, and if you want to know more about it, you're more than welcome to ask me, but she gets like shot in the leg with an arrow after she got shot in the shoulder with an arrow, and like, ah, la, 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 la. So unfortunately, she gets captured, though, outside of Paris by the English, right? Well, not even by the English, by the Burgundians, and then they sell her to the English, right? So, and she had won a lot of battles, but she had also grown such a reputation that the English thought that she was a heretic and a witch, right, and a cross-dresser. Like, so the English are going to be like, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to prove that this woman is a terrible person. We're going to put her on trial for witchcraft and heresy and cross-dressing, and then that way we'll prove that the French don't have any right to be crowning anybody king outside of our guy, Henry V, all right? So the English put her on trial for 70 charges, right, including witchcraft, heresy, and cross-dressing, because in the Old Testament it says that women are not supposed to wear the clothes of men, right? So, but she's going to be held captive for over a year. The English are going to tell her that she could live if she signs a document saying that she never heard God. And at one point, she actually does it, right? And she actually says, I died, I didn't hear it. But it's because they had her on a scaffold ready to chop her head off with an axe. So she said it out of fear, right? And when she ends up getting locked up, and they were like, all right, you're just going to have to live in prison for the rest of your life, Joan goes, no. And then she cross-dresses again defiantly against the people. Then she says, I only said that because I was afraid for my life and I am begging God's forgiveness, right? And so she cross-dresses again, and the only subject and the only thing that you can do to a person that apparently has been convicted a heretic and who has then been heretical is to kill them. So the English decide to burn her at the stake at the age of 19, right? So, and they take her ashes and they dump them into a river. And then, crazy enough, though, 25 years after her massive leadership role, being the virgin maiden that takes France from losing this war to end up winning this war, she is going to be canonized in 1920 by Benedict XV as the patron saint of France. And 25 years after her death, actually, the French royals do the trial that convicted her a heretic over again, and they then prove her innocent of heresy. So France is going to be losing battle after battle of the 100 Years' War until Joan of Arc shows up. The 100 Years' War is a very messy conflict, and it's insane, but the biggest thing, write this down somewhere real quick, that came out of it is it separated England completely from France as an island nation away from the continent. That's the biggest and most important thing. And also, English people are going to finally start speaking English. For a long time, the English, who, when their kings would actually meet with their advisors, they would always speak French, right? Because remember, England was founded by William of Normandy, who spoke French. So for a long time, that French language held on. And then after this war, England's like, I got no part of being French anymore. And they decided to separate themselves completely from the continent of Europe, right? So that's it. That's your flip for the weekend. I will see you guys on Monday. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Have a great one.